0800 Davis Strait, 200 miles southwest of Nuuk, Greenland. 2 Russian nuclear attack submarines, the most acoustically silent killing machines ever built, are moving at speed through the North Atlantic. Their captains believe they are invisible. They believe they are ghosts. They believe they have just pulled off the greatest intelligence coup of the 21st century. They are wrong, and they have 37 minutes before the entire world finds out. But here is the question that will haunt every admiral in Moscow for the next decade. How do you defeat a fleet that never existed? The story begins not with missiles or aircraft carriers. It begins with a phone call between 2 leaders the world assumed were enemies. In the weeks leading up to January 18th, President Trump's second administration had escalated its rhetoric over Greenland to a fever pitch. Washington was making unmistakable moves, legal, diplomatic, and quietly military, toward asserting unilateral strategic dominance over the Arctic island. For Europe, this wasn't just provocative, it was existential. Greenland sits at the throat of the North Atlantic, commanding the GIUK gap, the Greenland-Iceland-United Kingdom choke point through which every Russian submarine must pass to threaten the American eastern seaboard. Whoever controls Greenland controls the Atlantic, full stop. Macron went public with fury. The Charles de Gaulle carrier strike group was ordered north. European media exploded. American commentators declared NATO was fracturing at its foundations. That was exactly the plan. Because 4,000 miles away in a secured communications vault, U.S. and French military planners weren't arguing. They were finalizing the last details of Operation Ghost Corridor, a deception campaign of such breathtaking complexity that its true architecture was classified above the level of most 4-star generals. Here is what Moscow saw. A French carrier battle group, the nuclear-powered Charles de Gaulle, France's 42,500-ton crown jewel, escorted by Horizon-class frigates and Suffren-class nuclear attack submarines, plowing northward into the Davis Strait with zero operational security. Radars blazing, active sonar hammering the ocean floor like a jackhammer on concrete. Rafale-M fighters screaming low over U.S. radar installations in what appeared to be deliberate provocation. Here is what Moscow didn't know. There was no Charles de Gaulle. Not a single French capital warship was in those waters. What Russian satellites were tracking was a ghost fleet, Danish support vessels fitted with radar-reflective decoys, electronically spoofed to mimic the precise electromagnetic signatures of a full carrier strike group. The fleet was a hologram, painted onto NATO's adversary screens by some of the most sophisticated electronic warfare systems on the planet. The real French contribution to this operation was 15 men. 15, and they were already in position. GIUK gap, subsurface, 0300 hours. The Russian Northern Fleet's GRU, military intelligence, had been watching the apparent NATO civil war unfocking with barely contained excitement. For 20 years, Russian strategic planners had gamed out scenarios where NATO internal fractures could be exploited. Now it appeared to be happening in real time. The electromagnetic chaos of an American-French standoff was generating acoustic cover unlike anything passive sonar operators had ever recorded. The entire ocean was screaming. Northern Fleet Command made the call. Kazan and Novosibirsk, 2 Yasen-M class nuclear attack submarines, each displacing 13,800 tons submerged, each armed with Zircon hypersonic cruise missiles capable of striking Washington in under 5 minutes, were ordered to advance. The Yasen-M is not a normal submarine. NATO spent 2 decades trying to find one, with a pump jet propulsion system generating acoustic signatures so faint they dissolve into ocean background noise. These vessels had successfully evaded every conventional passive detection method: hydrophone arrays, towed sonar arrays, maritime patrol aircraft. Nothing worked. Russia had invested $2.8 billion per hull to build submarines that simply could not be heard. Captain First Rank Alexei Volkov aboard the Kazan ordered a head standard, 20 knots, fast, aggressive, capitalizing on the window before the surface chaos settled. He was threading his boat through what his chart showed as a natural acoustic shadow corridor, a stretch of water where thermal layers and underwater topography combined to scatter sound in every direction, making detection virtually impossible. What his chart did not show was what had been placed there 11 hours earlier. Those 15 French soldiers. They were not infantrymen. They were Groupe des Plongeurs de Minaire operators, France's elite underwater acoustic warfare specialists, cross-trained with U.S. Navy DEV-GRU units in Arctic subsurface intelligence collection. Inserted by MH-60R Seahawks, flying at wave-top height in near-zero visibility, they had landed on the ice shelf above that precise corridor. Working in temperatures of -34 degrees Celsius, using thermal-shielded drilling equipment designed to leave no electromagnetic trace, they spent 4 hours boring through 2 meters of Arctic sea ice. Into each hole, they lowered ANSSQ-110A extended echo
ranging sonobuoys, the latest generation of passive hydrophone arrays, sensitive enough to detect a human heartbeat at 2 kilometers. 15 holes, 15 sensors, a perfect acoustic tripwire stretched across the only viable passage route. At 15:27 hours, the first ping registered. Then, the second. The acoustic signature, the unique vibrational fingerprint of a pump jet propulsion system, was transmitted in real time via encrypted burst transmission to USS Gerald F. Ford's Combat Information Center. The frequency analysis matched. Kazan, bearing 047, speed 19.8 knots, depth 340 meters. 30 seconds later, Novosibirsk, bearing 052, speed 18.1 knots, depth 380 meters. The prey was inside the net.
1600 hours. 3 Arleigh-Burke-class destroyers and a French Horizon-class frigate reoriented simultaneously. No dramatic announcement, no warning shots. The bows swung, sonar transducers aligned, and at a combined signal from 2nd Fleet's Maritime Operations Center, active sonar arrays fired at full military power, directed, focused, point-blank into the hulls of both submarines. 240 decibels, underwater, at close range. To understand what that means, a space shuttle launch generates 180 decibels in air. What those sailors experienced inside Kazan and Novosibirsk was the acoustic equivalent of being inside a bell the size of a cathedral while someone struck it with a wrecking ball, repeatedly. Navigation systems failed, sonar operators collapsed, electronic warfare consoles overloaded and went dark. The precision gyroscopic systems that keep a submarine level and controlled began generating catastrophic errors. Then came the P-8A Poseidons. 4 training torpedoes entered the water, their propellers audible through every damaged sensor the Russian crews had left. Not armed, not yet. A message. Surface. Now. Or the next ones are real. At 16:23 hours, the USS Gerald R. Ford's flight deck cameras captured what no Russian admiral had ever intended the world to see. 2 Yasen-M submarines, $5.6 billion in cutting-edge Russian naval technology, broke the surface simultaneously, rolling in the Atlantic swells, caught, exposed, and utterly defeated. But the humiliation was only beginning, because those 15 French soldiers on the ice had spent those final hours doing something else entirely, recording every acoustic signature, every propulsion harmonic, every unique vibrational frequency that makes a Yasen-M different from every other submarine in the ocean. Data that passive sonar operators across NATO had been trying to collect for 2 decades was captured in a single afternoon. Russia's black holes had been cataloged, tagged, filed. They were no longer invisible. They were labeled. The Kremlin's response was silence, the most terrifying kind, because what happened in the Davis Strait on January 18th wasn't just a tactical defeat, it was a strategic decapitation. Russia's nuclear deterrence posture depends entirely on the survivability of its submarine fleet. The credibility of those Zircon missiles threatening the eastern seaboard depends on NATO not knowing where those submarines are. Now, NATO knows, not just today, for the operational lifetime of those hulls. In Beijing, the People's Liberation Army Navy quietly accelerated its acoustic signature classification review for its own Jin-class submarines. In Tehran, naval planners pulled assessments of Western deception capabilities and rewrote the threat section entirely. In every naval staff room from Oslo to Tokyo, the same question was circulating in hushed tones. If they did this to Russia's best submarines, what do they already know about ours? And somewhere above the Arctic Circle, 15 men in cold weather gear boarded their extraction helicopter and flew south, carrying hard drives containing data worth more than any aircraft carrier. The most decisive naval operation of this century was never announced, never confirmed, and officially never happened, which means the next one is already underway. Russia has one remaining option, not a military strike, but something quieter, targeting the satellite networks and undersea data cables that make operations like this possible. The question isn't whether they will try. The question is whether NATO has already prepared the next ghost for them to chase.